The laughter doesn't stop, even with handcuffs digging into their wrists. In the back of a police car, where silence and fear usually take over, these two teenage girls are joking about mugshots, fixing their hair, and planning how they'll look on camera. It almost feels unreal, until you realize what they're accused of. A plan so disturbing, so calculated, it turns this entire moment into something deeply unsettling. Because this isn't just careless behavior, it's a glimpse into a mindset that doesn't match the gravity of what almost happened. And as their conversation unfolds, what makes this case so disturbing isn't just the alleged plan. It's the complete disconnect between the severity of it. Sitting in the back of that squad car, Isabel and Lois don't sound like two teenagers who were just accused of plotting something horrific. They sound like they're on the way to a sleepover, laughing, teasing each other, and worrying more about how they'll look in a mugshot than what's about to happen to their lives. As the car moves, their conversation drifts from one random topic to another, almost like nothing serious is unfolding. One moment they're joking about becoming a couple in jail. The next, they're casually discussing makeup and whether they look good enough for their photos. There's no panic, no urgency, just this strange, almost surreal lightness. And then, underneath all of that, the reality starts to surface. Authorities say this wasn't some impulsive idea or a passing thought. According to prosecutors, this was a planned act, something discussed, imagined, and prepared for. The alleged target? A fellow student. The location? A school bathroom. And the method? Deeply unsettling. Investigators believe Isabel had become fixated on this classmate, drawing disturbing comparisons and developing an obsession that escalated into something far more dangerous. She allegedly told police that she heard voices, specifically the voice of a notorious school shooter, and believed that carrying out this act would somehow keep that connection alive. It's the kind of statement that instantly shifts this case from shocking to deeply disturbing on a psychological level. Lois, on the other hand, isn't described as the one driving the idea, but she's accused of playing a role that's just as serious. Prosecutors say she helped prepare for the act, including sharpening a knife that would have been used. And what makes this even harder to process is what allegedly came after in their plan. It wasn't just about the act itself. They had imagined what would follow. Placing a flower on the body, smoking a cigarette, almost like they were scripting a scene, rather than confronting the reality of what they were planning. And yet, sitting in that police car, none of that weight seems to register. Instead, they're focused on something else entirely. The moment they got caught. They start talking about the tip that led police to them. You can hear the frustration creeping in, not about what they were accused of, but about who might have told. They try to piece it together, going back and forth, analyzing handwriting, guessing who snitched. It becomes less about accountability and more about betrayal in their eyes. There's even a strange sense of annoyance, like the real problem isn't what happened, but the fact that someone exposed it. As the conversation continues, they shift again, this time talking about the police interview. And instead of fear or regret, there's almost excitement in their voices. They describe seeing security footage, reacting to it like it's something fascinating, rather than evidence in a serious investigation. "Whoa, I'm on camera," it's said with curiosity, even amusement. They talk about being cold in the interview room, about snacks being taken away, about small, almost trivial details, completely detached from the bigger picture. It feels less like two suspects processing a life-changing situation, and more like two teenagers recounting an unusual day at school. And then comes another layer that makes this even more complex. They begin discussing mental health, but not in a reflective or emotional way. Instead, it comes across as strategic. One of them mentions wishing she had received a diagnosis earlier, suggesting it might have helped her situation now. Not because she's trying to understand herself, but because it could have potentially changed how she's perceived. It's a moment that reveals a different kind of awareness, not about the harm of their actions, but about the consequences they're now facing. At one point, there's even talk about hoping to be sent somewhere else instead of jail. There's this expectation that things might not be as serious as they actually are. Almost like they're still trying to place this entire situation into a category that feels manageable or temporary. But reality keeps pushing through, even if they don't fully acknowledge it. They start guessing how much time they might get, throwing out numbers casually, debating who might be out sooner. It's spoken about like a timeline, not a sentence, like something they'll get through and move on from, rather than something that could permanently alter their futures. And still, the tone doesn't fully change. There are brief flickers of awareness, small moments where the weight of it almost lands. Mentions of their parents, the realization that their families don't even know yet, the thought of having to explain everything. But even those moments are quickly overshadowed by laughter, distractions, or another shift in conversation. It's this constant back and forth between reality and detachment. And that's what makes the footage so difficult to watch. Because while the alleged plan itself is undeniably disturbing, it's this behavior, the tone, the attitude, the complete lack of visible gravity that leaves a lasting impression. It raises questions that go beyond the case itself, about mindset, about awareness, about how something so serious can be treated with such unsettling casualness. And as the car continues down the road, one thing becomes increasingly clear. They're moving closer to a reality they don't seem fully prepared to face. As the ride continues, the atmosphere inside that car doesn't settle. It drifts further into something even more unsettling. The conversation keeps spiraling, bouncing between jokes, random thoughts, and fragments of reality trying to break through. But every time things get close to seriousness, it's almost immediately deflected. Like neither of them wants to sit with what's actually happening. At one point, they begin talking about how this whole situation will look to other people. Not in terms of guilt or consequences, but in terms of perception. How others will see them, how their story might spread. There's this strange awareness of attention, almost like they're already imagining themselves as part of something bigger, something talked about. And then it shifts again. They start discussing the victim, not with empathy, not with concern, but with distance. One of them mentions writing a note, explaining she doesn't feel guilty for her actions, only for how the other person might feel. It's a chilling distinction, because it shows that even now, the focus isn't on the act itself, but on the reaction to it. That emotional disconnect lingers. As they continue, their attention moves towards something as trivial as appearance again. Hair, photos, how they'll look in official records. It's almost surreal, this fixation on image while facing something that could define the rest of their lives. It feels like they're still operating in a completely different reality, one where consequences haven't fully registered. But then, slowly, cracks begin to show. The topic turns to their parents. There's hesitation now, a slight shift in tone. Questions about whether their families know yet, how they'll react, what they'll say. One of them anticipates anger, the other seems unsure. It's one of the few moments where the situation feels real, where the outside world starts to press in. Still, even that doesn't last long. They begin speculating again, this time about outcomes, sentences, time, who might get out first. It's discussed almost like a competition, casually thrown back and forth, as if they're talking about school schedules instead of criminal charges. One says she won't get much time, the other disagrees. There's no certainty, just assumptions, and a clear lack of understanding of how serious this actually is. And yet, beneath all of it, there's a quiet realization starting to build. You can hear it in the pauses, in the moments where neither of them fills the silence right away, in the small shifts where the laughter fades just a little quicker than before. Because no matter how much they deflect, reality is catching up. They briefly touch on what could have happened if things had gone differently, if the plan had actually been carried out. It's not explored deeply, almost like they don't want to go there. But the implication hangs in the air. The difference between what did happen and what almost did is massive. And that's when it becomes clear, this entire situation could have ended very differently. The only reason it didn't is because someone spoke up. A tip, a moment of intervention, something that stopped the plan before it became irreversible. And that detail changes everything. Because while their behavior in the car is disturbing, the reality is that a life was not lost. The worst-case scenario was prevented. But even with that, the consequences they now face are real. As the recording nears its end, the energy in the car feels different. Still scattered, still unfocused, but heavier. There's talk about discomfort, about wanting to get out, about how long this is taking. The earlier excitement starts to wear off, replaced by irritation, and something quieter underneath it. Acceptance hasn't fully set in, but it's getting closer. And outside that car, the system is already moving forward. In court, this footage becomes a key piece of evidence. Not just what was said, but how it was said, the tone, the lack of visible remorse, the casualness. All of it is taken into account. Because in cases like this, perception matters, behavior matters, and this recording paints a picture that's hard to ignore. When the question of release comes up, whether they should be allowed to go home while awaiting trial, the answer becomes clear. The judge looks at everything, the allegations, the planning, and this footage, and ultimately decides they should remain behind bars. No bond. And then comes another development, one that raises the stakes even higher. Despite their age, both are charged as adults. That decision alone changes everything. It means the system will treat this case with a level of severity that reflects the nature of the accusations, not their age. And with charges tied to attempted premeditated actions, the potential consequences become far more serious than anything they seem to anticipate in that car. And that's where this story leaves us, for now. A plan that never became reality, but came close enough to shake everyone involved. Two teenagers whose behavior raises more questions than answers. And a moment captured on camera that continues to define how this case is being understood. Because sometimes, it's not just the crime that leaves an impact, it's the mindset behind it. If you found this case as shocking and unsettling as it sounds, make sure to like the video, share it with someone who follows true crime, and subscribe for more deep dives into cases that most people can't even begin to understand. And I want to hear your thoughts on this. Do you think their behavior in that car reflects immaturity, detachment, or something deeper? Let me know in the comments.